From the moment Daniel Carter stepped onto his front porch that quiet evening, he felt a shift in the air, a strange tension hanging over the neighborhood like an invisible weight. He reached for the mailbox, only to freeze when he noticed a harsh red paper slapped onto his front door. Bold letters screamed at him, "HOA violation notice!" His pulse tightened. He read the accusations, unauthorized modifications, improper yard maintenance, community code breaches, all of it false. Daniel maintained his home with pride and precision. Nothing on his property ever violated a rule. Yet here he was, being threatened with fines, escalating penalties, and possible legal action. Across the sidewalk, he spotted Mr. Garrison, the HOA president, watching him with a stiff, almost satisfied expression. Garrison, with his clipboard and rigid posture, approached with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't greet Daniel, didn't explain, didn't offer proof. Instead, he delivered a rehearsed line, dripping with authority. "You've been warned. Fix it or the board will take action." Daniel pushed back, calmly explaining every detail, proving the notice was baseless. But Garrison waved him off, refusing to listen, acting as though Daniel's words were nothing more than background noise. The smirk on his face made something inside Daniel harden. This wasn't a mistake. It was targeted, intentional, personal. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Daniel realized this was only the first move in a much bigger conflict, one he never asked for, but now couldn't walk away from. He folded the notice slowly, sealing a silent promise inside. He would not back down. He would uncover the truth behind this fabricated violation and expose the real motives driving this attack. And as the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, Daniel Carter decided the battle had just begun. The next morning, Daniel stepped outside, determined to document every inch of his property. If the HOA thought they could intimidate him with false charges, they were mistaken. He held his phone steady, capturing the flawlessly trimmed edges of his lawn, the neatly arranged flower beds, the freshly painted exterior with no chips, cracks, or modifications. Every detail was pristine, because Daniel took pride in what he built. As he moved along the walkway, he felt eyes on him. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Mr. Garrison stood several houses away, arms crossed, pretending to chat with a neighbor while secretly monitoring Daniel's every move. This wasn't enforcement. It was surveillance. Targeted and deliberate. Daniel began recording a video, speaking clearly. "My property is in full compliance with every HOA guideline. Not a single item listed in the notice exists in reality." His voice stayed calm, but beneath it simmered a burning frustration. For years, Daniel had been quiet, cooperative, low profile. But Garrison had pushed the wrong person. Walking the perimeter, Daniel noticed something strange. A few shrubs flattened as if someone had stepped on them during the night. He knelt, inspecting the crushed leaves. These weren't from an animal. Someone had been on his property. Someone with a reason to make the yard look non-compliant. The thought hit him like ice. Was the HOA staging evidence? He photographed everything, documenting timestamps, angles, and condition. If they planned to escalate this, he would be ready. The stillness of the morning felt unnatural, as though the entire neighborhood was silently watching, waiting to see how far this dispute would go. Daniel pocketed his phone and exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a false violation anymore. This was harassment. And now he had proof. The HOA wanted a fight, and they were about to get one. Daniel's palms were clammy as he entered the HOA meeting room that afternoon. Rows of folding chairs were filled with residents murmuring anxiously, their faces a mixture of curiosity, concern, and fear. At the front of the room, Mr. Garrison sat rigidly at the long table, clipboard in hand, flanked by other board members whose expressions were a mix of irritation and calculated indifference. Daniel took a deep breath, stepping forward with the printed photos. From his property, the evidence of compliance, the flattened shrubs, the meticulous landscaping. "These documents prove my property is fully compliant," he began, voice steady but firm. Eyes scanned the room, some nodding in quiet agreement, others avoiding his gaze. Garrison's lips tightened. "Procedures have been followed," he replied curtly, but his tone lacked conviction. Daniel laid out the photos, pointing to inconsistencies in the violation notices. the shadows indicating someone had trespassed, and timestamps proving he had not altered anything. Every resident could see the absurdity of the claims now. Whispers grew louder as the tension mounted. Daniel knew he had the room's attention. Garrison shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his control over the narrative was slipping. The more Daniel spoke, the more the board's facade cracked. Every lie, every exaggeration, every personal attack was now exposed under the scrutiny of the community. By the end of the meeting, Daniel's confidence surged. He had done what no previous resident dared. He had shown the truth without compromise. And as the residents left the room, murmuring support, he sensed the balance of power beginning to shift. This confrontation was not the end. It was the turning point. The HOA had underestimated him, and the next moves would only escalate the stakes. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Daniel checked his phone again. The live camera feed showed the white SUV idling at the end of the street, engine off. And there he was, Mr. Garrison, clipboard in hand, creeping along the side gate of Daniel's property. Daniel's heart raced. This wasn't routine. This was deliberate intimidation. He gripped his phone tighter, watching every movement. Noting the shadows and the way, Garrison's flashlight highlighted areas of his yard that had previously been cited as violations. Daniel paced, thinking through options. Call the police? Confront him directly? Or simply observe? He knew one misstep could give the HOA a pretext for more aggressive action. His mind raced as the tension built. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was harassment, surveillance, a demonstration of power. The realization settled heavily on him. Garrison wanted control over every aspect of his life. Every step, every minor detail, monitored. Every time Daniel turned to glance out the window, the SUV's headlights would flicker on and off as if signaling a warning. Hours passed with Daniel observing, mentally preparing for what he knew was inevitable. A confrontation that could finally expose the HOA's abuse to the community. The letters kept arriving, piling up like a wave, threatening to drown him. Daniel sifted through each one, incredulous. Each fine was more absurd than the last. Claims of unapproved landscaping, dangerous wildlife attractants, imaginary structural modifications. His kitchen table was covered with photos, notices, and envelopes, each stamped with bold red letters declaring violations. Daniel rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of the barrage. Nothing matched reality. His yard was perfect, his mailbox freshly painted, trash cans tucked neatly behind fences. Yet the HOA insisted he was in violation, escalating the stakes with every correspondence. The absurdity was deliberate. Daniel realized the letters were a psychological game, designed to exhaust him, to break his resolve. He documented everything meticulously, comparing photos, noting times and dates, tracking the white SUV that seemed to follow his every move. As days passed, he could feel the pressure mounting, not just from the letters, but from the constant surveillance and whispers of neighbors. Every step outside felt scrutinized, every movement cataloged. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were asserting control. By midweek, Daniel had prepared a folder with every letter, photo, and note he had collected. This wasn't about grass, fences, or mailbox colors. It was about power, and Daniel was determined to prove it, even if it meant confronting the system head-on. That night, Daniel sat upright, the glow of his tablet illuminating his anxious face. The security feed flickered, revealing the unmistakable figure of Mr. Garrison creeping through the side gate. His flashlight beams swept over the fence and into the corner of Daniel's yard, every movement calculated and deliberate. Daniel's heart pounded, realizing that this wasn't just oversight or negligence, it was a direct intrusion, an intentional violation of his privacy. The white SUV waited silently on the street, its engine off, a silent accomplice to Garrison's clandestine movements. Daniel leaned closer to the tablet, capturing every step, every turn, every subtle pause. His palms were sweaty, his grip tight, yet he forced himself to remain composed. This evidence would be critical, a tangible record of the harassment he had endured for weeks. As Garrison circled the yard, Daniel's mind raced. Each violation letter, each fine, each accusation suddenly formed a coherent pattern. The HOA's relentless pressure, the invasive photographs, the vehicle that always seemed present. They were all pieces of the same calculated campaign. But now Daniel had proof, undeniable and irrefutable. He meticulously recorded the footage, time-stamping each moment, noting every action. Every detail mattered. The way Garrison lifted the latch, the way his flashlight illuminated the edges of the gate, the exact path he took through the yard. This was more than trespassing. It was intimidation, manipulation, and control. Daniel's anger burned, but he channeled it into focus. For hours, Daniel observed, documenting, analyzing. He considered every possible response, every legal step, every conversation he would have with neighbors, authorities, and eventually the HOA board. The harassment had been relentless, but the power of evidence was now in his hands. He could finally turn the tables. By the early hours, Daniel leaned back, exhausted but resolute. He knew this footage would expose the pattern, validate his claims, and lay the groundwork for reclaiming his home. The intrusion was a turning point, a moment that crystallized the HOA's overreach, and Daniel was ready to fight back, armed not with conjecture but with undeniable truth. The flashing lights reflected off the asphalt as Daniel took a deep breath, standing tall despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. The officers had arrived, and for the first time, the imbalance of power that had haunted him for weeks was visibly shifting. Mr. Garrison, the orchestrator of constant intrusion and intimidation, now appeared cornered, clutching a key that symbolized access he never should have had. His confident facade had crumbled, replaced by a mixture of fear and disbelief. Daniel watched as the police meticulously documented the scene, officers asking precise questions, recording evidence, and verifying the intrusive activities. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, whispers spreading like wildfire as the truth became undeniable. The tension that had built over countless days, nights, and violations reached its apex here, in the driveway of Daniel's own home. Every fine, every photo, every letter that had once seemed like a minor annoyance now served as a testament to the harassment he had endured. Daniel felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and the lingering anger that had fueled his meticulous documentation. He had been patient, thorough, and deliberate, and now the community could witness the tangible consequences of unchecked show power. The officers explained each step, the procedures for confiscating keys, documenting evidence, and filing complaints. Daniel realized that this moment was more than confrontation. It was accountability. The once smug, untouchable figure of authority that had haunted his life now faced scrutiny, not only from law enforcement, but from the entire neighborhood. As the situation stabilized, Daniel's gaze shifted to the assembled neighbors, many of whom had endured their own silent battles with the HOA. The realization struck him. This confrontation wasn't just personal. It was symbolic of the power imbalance that had affected the entire community. The collective sigh of relief, the murmurs of approval, the quiet acknowledgement of justice, all resonated with him. In that driveway, Daniel understood that persistence, documentation, and courage had transformed fear into empowerment. The narrative had shifted. The HOA's overreach had been exposed, and the stage was set for a broader resolution. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was a decisive turning point, a moment when the weight of truth could no longer be denied. Daniel allowed himself a brief exhale, knowing the battle for accountability had entered a new, promising phase. The projector hummed softly, casting the grainy yet undeniable footage across the room. Daniel stood at the front, pointing emphatically at the screen as the board. Members squirmed in their seats. Mr. Garrison's intrusion, captured in crystal-clear detail, left no room for ambiguity. Each step, each glance, each deliberate movement into Daniel's private space was displayed for all to see. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. The evidence that had once been dismissed as paranoia now stood as irrefutable proof. Daniel's voice, calm but firm, narrated the timeline of events, describing the letters, the fines, and the patterns of harassment that had plagued him for weeks. The room was tense, every word echoing with authority, every image a testament to his meticulous documentation. Board members exchanged glances, some defensive, others clearly unnerved. The room that had once been a theater of bureaucratic control now became a chamber of accountability. The neighbors' reactions, a mix of shock, empathy, and quiet vindication, underscored the weight of Daniel's evidence. He detailed the calculated intrusion, the patterns of surveillance and the relentless fines, emphasizing the psychological toll it had taken. With every description, the room's energy shifted. It was no longer about rules or aesthetics. It was about trust, privacy, and power. The moment was transformative. Daniel's perseverance had turned private anguish into a public revelation. The HOA's power, once opaque and unchallenged, now lay bare. And in this room, witnesses saw that persistence, courage, and careful documentation could challenge even the most entrenched authority. As Daniel concluded, a quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Board members, once untouchable, now faced the consequences of their actions. The community's eyes, wide with realization, acknowledged the injustice that had silently persisted for far too long. Daniel's voice, steady and unwavering, had changed the narrative. No longer a lone homeowner versus an overreaching HOA, but a story of accountability, empowerment, and communal awareness. The sun cast a warm glow over the HOA office, but the light did little to ease the tension in Daniel's chest. He stood among neighbors, watching as officers methodically carried boxes of documents, laptops, and binders labeled evidence from the building. Each item represented countless violations, patterns of intrusion, and months of relentless harassment. The HOA treasurer, visibly anxious, was escorted toward a police vehicle. His eyes darted between the officers and the gathering crowd, aware that the community's gaze had shifted from silent tolerance to scrutiny and judgment. Murmurs rippled through the assembled neighbors as cameras clicked and phones recorded the moment. This was more than documentation. It was validation, proof that their suspicions and frustrations were real. Daniel's thoughts raced. Every fine, every letter, every invasive inspection had culminated in this moment of reckoning. The officers cataloged each item with meticulous precision, ensuring that the full extent of the HOA's overreach would be formally recognized. Daniel felt a complex wave of relief, vindication, and a lingering anger that had fueled his perseverance. He observed the reactions of the onlookers. Neighbors exchanged nods, whispered confirmations, and quiet expressions of solidarity. This was a community witnessing accountability, a collective realization that persistent documentation, courage, and patience could confront entrenched authority. Daniel knew the fight had not only been personal. The evidence secured by law enforcement would prevent future abuses, protect the neighborhood, and restore a sense of security that had long been absent. In that moment, the air seemed to shift, the oppressive weight of intimidation lifted, replaced with the quiet energy of justice finally being served. Even as the boxes disappeared into the police vehicles, Daniel remained focused. He understood that the road ahead required continued vigilance. The exposure of wrongdoing was a milestone, but recovery, community healing, and the establishment of trustworthy governance were just as essential. Yet for the first time in weeks, Daniel allowed himself to imagine life beyond harassment, where his home and neighborhood could finally be safe and respected. Weeks later, the neighborhood gathered under a bright afternoon sun for a community block party, a celebration of resilience, recovery, and the enduring spirit of togetherness. Daniel mingled with neighbors, exchanging smiles and warm greetings, a sense of relief and joy tangible in every conversation. Children ran between adults, laughter ringing through the air, carrying a lightness that had been absent for far too long. The new HOA board members, mid-40s and approachable in demeanor, shook hands with residents, signaling a fresh start. Their formal yet friendly approach contrasted sharply with the previous administration, demonstrating that authority could coexist with respect, transparency, and fairness. Daniel observed the interactions closely, noting the change in atmosphere. Trust was slowly returning, and the community's energy reflected cautious optimism. Every conversation carried a subtle acknowledgement of the challenges faced and overcome. The invasive inspections, the fines, and the intimidation were not forgotten. But the neighborhood's shared resilience had transformed past frustrations into a renewed commitment to communal well-being. Daniel felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that his perseverance and careful documentation had not only safeguarded his own home, but also contributed to systemic change. As he spoke with a few longtime neighbors, Daniel reflected on the journey from tension to trust. The block party was more than a social gathering. It was a tangible symbol of the community's ability to heal, unite, and prioritized transparency and fairness. The laughter, the camaraderie, and the visible care for one another marked a new chapter in neighborhood life. Through casual conversations and shared meals, Daniel noticed that the spirit of collaboration had taken root. Neighbors who had once observed silently now actively participated in discussions about community standards, governance, and accountability. The sense of empowerment was palpable. Daniel smiled quietly, appreciating the small victories that culminated in this moment of collective renewal. By the afternoon's end, Daniel understood that the neighborhood had reclaimed its identity. Safety, mutual respect, and communal trust had returned, built on the foundation of evidence, courage, and perseverance. It was a day to remember, a day where accountability met recovery, and a community embraced hope and unity. With the streets calm and the white SUV nowhere in sight, Daniel set to work securing his home. Every camera mounted, every angle adjusted, was a tangible act of reclaiming his space, asserting control, and ensuring that the past weeks of intrusion would never repeat. The warm glow of the porch light highlighted his focused expression as he worked. Methodically, each movement precise, each adjustment deliberate. Installing the cameras was more than a practical measure. It was a symbolic reclaiming of safety and autonomy. The side gate, the front porch, and every vulnerable corner were now under watchful vigilance, a protective barrier against future overreach. Daniel's mind replayed the weeks of tension, the violations, the intrusive inspections, and the constant undercurrent of anxiety. But now he felt a sense of empowerment replacing the fear. Neighbors occasionally glanced over, noticing the careful work being done. Their supportive nods and subtle smiles reinforced the sense that this wasn't just Daniel's victory, but a reaffirmation of the community's right to privacy and security. The calm of the street, previously marred by uncertainty, now radiated a quiet sense of peace. As he completed the installation, Daniel stepped back to review the setup. The cameras were unobtrusive yet comprehensive. The angles perfect, the coverage thorough. Each piece of technology represented both vigilance and reassurance, a watchful eye ensuring that the lessons of the past weeks would guide the future. This moment, though quiet and solitary, carried immense weight. Daniel understood that by taking control of his environment, he had transformed anxiety into preparedness, fear into foresight, and intrusion into empowerment. The act of safeguarding his home was simultaneously an act of reclaiming normalcy, dignity, and personal authority. By the end of the night, Daniel felt a profound sense of closure. The streets were calm, the gates locked, the cameras operational, and his neighborhood at peace. The balance of power had shifted permanently, and his home, once a site of tension, had been restored as a place of security and control. As twilight descended, Daniel leaned against the front porch railing, watching the quiet street bathed in fading light. The neighborhood, once tense and fraught with suspicion, now exuded calm and harmony. Neighbors waved from their driveways, smiling and greeting one another, a subtle testament to restored trust and community spirit. Daniel's thoughts wandered through the weeks of upheaval, the intrusive inspections, the relentless fines, the surveillance, and the anxiety that had once shadowed every moment at home. Each challenge had been a test of patience, perseverance, and courage. Now, with the streets calm and the HOA held accountable, he felt a sense of profound relief and accomplishment. The twilight sky, painted in soft hues of orange and violet, mirrored the subtle shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. The once heavy tension had lifted, replaced by an enduring sense of security, mutual respect, and communal awareness. Daniel reflected on the importance of vigilance, documentation, and standing up against abuse of power, understanding that these actions had not only protected him but had safeguarded the entire community. He observed families chatting, children playing, and neighbors exchanging kind words. Moments that had once seemed ordinary but now carried profound significance. The restoration of harmony was both visible and emotional, a reminder that accountability and resilience could transform fear into empowerment, division into unity. As Daniel continued to watch the street, a sense of gratitude washed over him. The home he had fought to protect now stood as a symbol of perseverance, courage, and the power of evidence-backed action. The community had reclaimed its peace, its trust, and its shared identity, proving that even in the face of relentless harassment, Integrity and steadfastness could prevail. In the fading light, Daniel allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been arduous, but the outcome affirmed that persistence, preparation, and courage could restore balance, protect privacy, and foster a community rooted in fairness, trust, and hope. The neighborhood was no longer just a collection of houses. It was a united, vigilant, and resilient community, ready to face the future together.